Are we switched on with all of these? Good evening. There we are. That's now switched on. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Conduit Club. I'm Chris Morris. Thanks for coming to this event on Hong Kong. We're now more than 3 years on from the protests which rocked Hong Kong in 2019-2020. I know we've got a lot of expertise in the audience. They were the largest series of demonstrations in Hong Kong's history. I guess a turning point for Hong Kong, and I suppose also for the perception of China and the Communist Party leadership elsewhere in the world. I don't need to tell you that dissent was crushed pretty ruthlessly. It still is being so. Many people have left Hong Kong, and nothing is quite what it was before. And we have a panel who are going to discuss this. Unfortunately, Didi, who was going to join us from Germany, is ill, so she's not with us this evening, and we send her our best wishes. Hope she's recovered. I think she has the flu that everyone's been having in the last few weeks. But with me on the panel are Chung, Kwong and Stephen Vines. And I'm going to break with tradition, because normally I introduce you, but I think you should both introduce yourself. So, Chung, tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Chung Kwong. I am the...
Should we check the microphone? Yeah.
Yes.
Is it working? Yes, it's working. I am the Hong Kong and Security Lead at the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. I'm originally born and raised in Hong Kong, forced to leave Hong Kong in 2020 July. And since then, lived in Germany for 3 years and moved to the UK quite recently, and now settling down because of the BNO scheme that was very generously offered to Hong Kongers. And I'm also doing a PhD on data protection law. That's completely irrelevant and boring, but I'd love to mention it.
Sure it's not. And Stephen, am I allowed to call you a veteran correspondent?
Yeah.
I'm probably one of those two.
Yeah.
So
Join the club. I'm a recovering journalist. I was in Hong Kong for about 3 decades, and I left for the same reasons. By the end of the 2020s and 2021, when the national security law was introduced, at that time I was the presenter of RTHK, which is the public broadcaster, public current affairs program that got scrapped. I was writing columns for Apple Daily that got closed down. I wrote a book about Hong Kong which was banned from bookshops. There was a sort of pattern, so I concluded, plus a lot of other activity that was going on, that Hong Kong wasn't a very healthy place to be in. But I'm kind of, I am originally from Britain, so I'm back where I started. I was never intending to come back, but hey.
And now living on the mean streets of St Albans.
It's the edgiest place on the planet.
So what we're going to do, I'm going to get both of our panellists to speak for a few minutes to begin with, and then I'll ask them a few questions, then of course I will open up to all the questions I'm sure you'll have from the floor. Stephen, do you want to go first? And maybe if you can say something, just to sort of bring us up to date, what's happening in Hong Kong now, before we dig back into perhaps some of the reasons, the deeper reasons for the protests in 2019-2020?
Yeah, I think what's happening in Hong Kong, I can say this now, but I didn't think it at the time, and that I think was because of naivety, was the inevitable consequence of having a totalitarian state offering a degree of autonomy, in fact offering any kind of freedom to a part of its territory. Promises were made to the people of Hong Kong, treaties were signed with Britain, a lot of rhetoric flowed about one country, two systems and all the rest of it, and it's gone. There is no such thing anymore as a free press in Hong Kong. Hong Kong used to have one of the freest presses in Asia. It used to be very well ranked in the Reporters Without Borders annual survey of journalists of media freedom. It's now ranked at around about 140, down there with other beacons of press freedom like Rwanda. And it, everywhere you look, election system has been trashed. The judiciary is being suborned. You now have, despite guarantees actually written in the constitution, from Hong Kong's mini constitution, the basic law, guarantees to right by trial by jury, the right to appoint your own legal representative, all this just gone. So in a very short space of time, following the protests of 2019-2020, civil society has been destroyed. Trade unions, student unions, housing associations, the whole complex of neighbourhood associations have either been closed down or have been coerced into silence. And of course, and I can never forget this because a lot of people, including people in this room, have a sort of guilt complex about it. Besides this, we have many of our friends, over 10,000 people have been arrested for political offences. Incidentally, in the year that that happened, that was more than people arrested in the entire Chinese mainland of 1.4 billion people. It's an extraordinary thing in a society of just 7 million odd people. The reality is that to protest in Hong Kong, historically, or indeed even raise your voice overseas, they claim extraterritoriality in these matters, is a very dangerous thing. I don't think it is actually dangerous in Britain because I don't think a British court would extradite anybody. But, you know, if you're a Hong Konger with family in Hong Kong, it's a very serious thing you have to consider because they don't stop at persecuting the people who are responsible for these so-called offences of national security. They go to the families and they intimidate the families, etc., etc. I'm looking for a glimmer of light. Maybe you can help with one. I can't summon up one at the moment, but it's very dark.
Ching, I mean, you may well have family still in Hong Kong. I mean, what's your reflection?
I think the glimmer of light that we are both looking for is actually the fact that we're still talking about this. The issue didn't just die or people just have forgotten Hong Kong. It's not the case right now. So that's the glimmer of light that we're all trying to search for, and we have to bear in mind. I do have families in Hong Kong, and unfortunately, one of my family members have been harassed by the Hong Kong authorities. A family member has been summoned into a police station for at least 3 times now, according to what I know, asking questions about, do you know what Ching is doing? Do you know where Ching was? And so on. He knew nothing about what I'm doing, and I, out of protection, I never tell my family members about what exactly happened in my life for that particular reason. But still, they go after that family member and ask questions constantly. And I think that reflects the situation in Hong Kong, that it's no longer autonomous the way as we knew it. It's the difference between Hong Kong and China is narrow, not only in the sense of how they treat political dissidents or how do they treat activists, but also in the business sector as well. Like the national security law, which criminalizes sedition, colluding with foreign forces, and other very fake crimes, actually make it very difficult for companies operating in Hong Kong to operate in compliance. For example, if you are running Google or Facebook or other internet service, you will not be able to operate the way you want to because the law allow the government to come to you and say you have to take down certain contents. You have to either take it down or we come and confiscate your service and then we do it ourselves. So it's increasingly very difficult to operate, and even for the banking sector. I'm not sure how many of you actually have an account with HSBC. HSBC basically are in support of the national security law, and there are many other companies who do that as well. And so, it's just not the Hong Kong that Steve and I have lived in. It's no longer the same place. I think it's quite fair to say that.
Let's go back to 2019 then, when the protests, the demonstrations began. You were both still living there at the time. I suppose 2 questions really, and I'll ask you both to reflect on them. Why did they become so big? And was there ever any realistic possibility of a different outcome to the one we have today? Steve? Or whoever.
The reason why the 2019 movement, as we saw it so big, is because people feel very threatened. I'm not sure if any of you remember there was another mass social movement in 2014 called the Umbrella Revolution. And there was a very big movement as well, but it's not as big as this one. The last one in 2014 lasted for 79 days. This lasted for over a year. The reason why is that people feel like it's a fight for survival as Hong Kongers. By survival of Hong Kongers, I mean to protect the values that we hold very dear to. I grew up in 1996, a year before the handover. So I grew up in the freest time ever in Hong Kong. I had the chance to learn how to think critically, to be able to use my voice, to try to make the society a better place. And then suddenly I was told, this kind of freedom can be taken away so easily. The freedom the freedom to protest, the freedom of assembly can be easily taken away simply because the government doesn't like it. They can use tear gas in a very peaceful protest. So that kind of changed the view of my generation towards the society. I have friends, my peers, who would go to Shenzhen before the protest, like 1 month before the protest, they would be in Shenzhen happily praising China, saying that it's such a good place to be and I want to go to Shenzhen every weekend for like bubble tea, hot pot, whatever. And then 1 month later, they're the one calling for let's not do this anymore because this is threatening our identity as Hong Kongers. This is trying to stop us from being who we are, or this is in contradiction to what we were taught as kids. And so I think that's why it became so big. And the other thing is because it's a leaderless movement, meaning that there is no decision-making body, not like social movement in the past where there's a group of leaders saying that, okay, let's organize a protest, this date, where, when, and so on. But like almost everything is crowdsourced. People suddenly realize it's all up to them because whoever tries to organize a process from a top-down approach will be arrested, will be prosecuted, that process will be banned. So people started to organize it among themselves. And it's very empowering for us. It gave us a sense of agency. If any one of you is familiar with Hong Kong history, it has been about a denial of agency. Like, the modern history of Hong Kong is about a denial of agency. We were, through various occupations, Hong Kongers' voices have been stifled again and again through British rule and now forcefully through the brutality of the CCP. Like, we are silenced for so many years, and then suddenly we had a chance, or we were forced to realize that it's up to us to do something, or everything that we treasure will be gone. And I think that's why a lot of people get involved. And imagine if you just going to dinner in the city and then suddenly you realize there's tear gas, or there's police charging into the shopping mall with real ammunition threatening to shoot people using completely disproportionate forces. Like, it's very difficult not to get angry. Like, I'm just there for dinner, I didn't even want to do anything, and then they came after you. So I think that kind of also sparked up the anger of Hong Kongers, that they were very eager to take part in the movement as well.
Stephen, could it have ended any other way?
Well, here's the thing, and this is something Ching's just alluded to. There was never a plan. I think people know this, but I'll just say this very briefly. This was provoked by a new bill that was coming up to allow extradition to the Chinese mainland of people in Hong Kong. In other words, they would go from a regulated and free legal system into a legal system where the outcome was already preordained. 99.9% or something ridiculous like that of people who appear in the mainland court are found guilty. But it just exploded, and I think it was this sense of pent-up pressure. Again, we've talked about the fact that there were protests in 2014, which ended, if you like, without a result. You then had 2019. Incidentally, after 2014, it was very confidently predicted that that was it. Hong Kong would never rise up again. People had learnt their lesson. It's futile to protest. And I want to look at this from a slightly different point of view. When I was a student, a very long time ago, I was very friendly with a group of Czechs who were living in exile in Britain. Oh, I'm a bit older than you. I reveal exclusively. So this is a very long time ago. And they had been activists in the 1968 Prague uprising. And they were sitting around in Britain talking about the fact that they would be going back to Czechoslovakia, and there was this poet or somebody, playwright called Havel, who they said was, you know, who had been a great influence on them. We thought, yeah, never heard of him either. And they were very confident. They were very confident. I thought they were batty. That what they had set as a seed in the Prague Rising of 1968 would become a transformation of their society. Well, who was right and who was wrong? So, yes, the protests in Hong Kong of 2019, of course, well, not of course, but they didn't change policy. In fact, what happened was, and I think this is really the crucial point, the narrative of the Chinese Communist Party is Hong Kong would never be in the state that it's in today with these draconian rules if the Hong Kong people hadn't been so audacious as to challenge the authority of the Chinese Communist Party. The truth is, and now it's all there for us to see, is that in 2014, China's State Council had produced a document, a very extensive document, detailing how the total authority of the Chinese state would be imposed in Hong Kong. Those documents don't come out of the ether. It's not some independent think tank putting it together. The plan always was, I'm now very convinced of this, to expunge Hong Kong's autonomy. Remember, incidentally, China has a whole range of autonomous regions. Xinjiang, for example, is called an autonomous region. We know what goes on there. But, you know, Hong Kong was a special administrative region, like Macau. And the idea was that somehow this would be different. It would escape the great embrace of a centralizing Communist Party, and Hong Kong would somehow escape the clutches. I think what happened in 2019 was that the process of exercising complete control was accelerated, not initiated. And I think this is very important to understand, because the narrative, again, and one of the reasons why I'm pleased to be here is we're also celebrating the publication of the book Liberate Hong Kong, which I incidentally do recommend very strongly to everybody, is that outside of Hong Kong, it is possible to set the history straight, to set the narrative straight. Hong Kong was not gripped with riots. In fact, if you were there in 2019, 2020, there was very large demonstrations. There were riots. It's true, there were riots, but that was part of the picture. Most of Hong Kong was filled with people peacefully demonstrating. And the extraordinary thing, which is something which I did a lot of as a journalist, was go around to the areas outside the centre of town. And you go into housing estates, you go into all sorts of places in the New Territories, which is where most of Hong Kong people actually live. And what you found was this extraordinary sense of solidarity. You know, somebody was injured. Immediately, somebody from Hong Kong's very crowded, so everything's very dense, would, you know, send down water, send down saline, send down bandages, whatever. Hong Kong was in a fervour of excitement, and it really was. There was an extraordinary atmosphere. I don't think there was a clear objective. The objective was democracy. That's a laudable objective, but it's not it's not 1, 2, 3, we'll have this, we'll have that, and we'll have the other. But it's a process. The process has been set back.
Ching, given what Stephen has said about the acceleration of the plan, do you think the extent of the crackdown came as a surprise or not?
I'd say from my perspective, and I think I'm confidently speaking on behalf of the colleagues that I worked with in 2020 in the primary election, the scope of the crackdown didn't come as a surprise, but the speed was a surprise. Like, I remember in 2020, in January, when a very, very bright journalist who decided to go into politics, Gwyneth Ho, came to my place in Hamburg in a very cold winter. And she said she's going to run for the primary election in Hong Kong, which basically all of them are arrested and being put behind bars right now. And I was like, oh, are you ready? You know what's going to come, right? And she's like, yeah, it means at least 10 years in jail at the end, at some point. And I was like, okay, as soon as you're ready, I'm happy to help. And so I didn't think that these things wouldn't come. I think it's quite certain that there will be a mass crackdown. But it surprised me that in 2020 in May, they would already announce that there was going to be a national security law. And nobody was sure at the time what would happen with that law. And I remember in the evening before the law passed, everyone was like holding on to the edge of the chair thinking who is going to be the first one to be arrested? Is there going to be a round of arrest immediately? Who is going to be arrested? Joshua Wong, Benny Tai, those like veteran famous activists or who? But nothing very serious happened. There were arrests on the streets because people were waving flags of Hong Kong independence and so on. And I think what comes after, it's very expected. I'm saying I expected all of those things from a rational point of view, but when it actually comes, it's very hard to take emotionally. Like knowing the place that you've grown up changed completely. Things that were used to be the right things to do, but became the wrong things. I think that's very hard to take. But I didn't think there was an other way, because I'd see the 2019 movement as a way to facilitate meaningful changes. Not that change, it doesn't mean that it will always change for the better, but activism or the fight for democracy is always trying to facilitate meaningful changes whenever possible. And you're always trying to find new methods. Okay, peaceful protest doesn't work. So people maybe switch to more radical side of things because out of desperation, out of many reasons. So people turn to international advocacy, calling the US to sanction Hong Kong officials. It's a process of trial and error. And just unfortunately, we end in the error part of the spectrum right now. But there might be other meaningful changes coming ahead. And this kind of discussion, or the work that a lot of fellow activists are doing, is trying to facilitate meaningful changes so that that process of democratization can continue outside or inside Hong Kong, let's say.
How many people have left since the protest ended, and what has that done to Hong Kong's social fabric?
Well, as ever, this is a hotly contested subject. According to British official figures, there's 134,000 plus people who have joined the British National Overseas Scheme, which, as Chung says, is, I have to say, this is a very generous and very welcome escape route for Hong Kongers. I think the reality is that that doesn't represent the totality of people who've left. First of all, a lot of people have gone to Canada, gone to Australia, gone to the United States. A lot of the people, incidentally, who've gone to Canada already had Canadian passports because they had left after the Tiananmen massacre in '89 and then gone back thinking, you know, it's not so bad, we'll go back. But they reactivated their Canadian citizenship. So I don't have a figure, but I think we are talking about the numbers under the BNO scheme are the tip of the iceberg. How do we know that? Because extraordinary things are happening in Hong Kong. These elite schools, which the middle-class parents used to queue up round the block to get their kids into them, are now got vacancies. You can get into those schools a lot more easily than you could before. Getting into the civil service, which is a very desirable job. Civil service in Hong Kong is very highly paid compared to a lot of other jobs, is much easier. In fact, it's not only easier, they've had to lower the standard to fill up their recruitment. They've done that for the police, but you could say that that standard had dropped anyway, so they've just caught up with reality. What else do you know about Hong Kong? It's very hard to sell property in Hong Kong now. There are so many properties on the market that it's not so much that the price has gone down, which of course it has, but the market has become immobile. So I think the exodus is very big. And who are the people who are leaving? Well-educated people are mainly motivated to leave if they have school-aged children. If you look at Hong Kong families here, the profile of them very typically young families with school-age children. They're coming because they don't want those children to be educated under this new coercive system where they have to stand rigidly to attention at flag-raising ceremonies, where they have to go through indoctrination in the classroom, etc., etc. So, Hong Kong is losing the brightest and the best. The exact numbers of the brightest and best, I don't actually know, but it's a lot.
I'd say if you want to know how many Hong Kongers have left, just walk through the streets of central London. And then, like, I'm so scared of swearing in Cantonese in central London. I swear a lot in Cantonese, so I'm so scared to do it right now because I know someone's going to hear me and they would understand what I'm talking about and it would be quite embarrassing. That's how many Hong Kongers have moved to London alone. And in places like Birmingham or Brighton, there are more Hong Kongers. They're a very big Hong Kongers community. And if you look at the election that's coming up, you'll see parties working specifically to target Hong Kongers in their own region if there's a large Hong Kong community, because there might be thousands of them which might be able to swing a seat. Who knows? And so I'd say a lot, and just I think half of my friend groups have moved outside of Hong Kong, and the rest of them are in jail or still stuck in Hong Kong because they have their passport confiscated. And I think that kind of gives you a reflection of like how your life is as Hong Kong, or as a former Hong Konger right now, is that you don't actually get to meet your original friend group that easily because they're scattered all over the world. And every time when there is some sort of Hong Konger gatherings, there's a conference, there's a summit, that kind of thing, you feel like it's like a Twitter friend meeting. Like it feels like you're almost online making friends, and then you see them in real life every 2 years or 3 years. And I don't actually have the actual figures on the top of my head. I think Stephen already quoted the figures, and that's from a very personal point of view of what I see.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, the way diasporas develop is always interesting, and amazing stories emerge. Can we just turn our attention to China itself? To what extent do we know what impact, if any, the protests in Hong Kong had inside China? How much was news of them spread on social media? How many people simply had no idea they were happening?
I think this is a key point, because if you run a dictatorship, you run a paranoid government. All dictatorships are paranoid, and they are gripped with fear that the very carefully constructed facade will be broken. Now, the Chinese history is punctuated by the reality that the challenges